Hi everybody, I'm Bridget Palmer, a teaching artist from the Luther Burbank Center for the Arts. My specialty is acting, improvisation, and story writing. I direct a lot of children's shows, and I have also written a play for children to perform called Alex and the Magic Staff. Currently, I'm working on my second play for children. This video is the third lesson in my series of exercises to help young people develop their imagination, their acting skills, and their capacity to write stories. I'm going to ask you to pause the video numerous times to use your imagination to come up with ideas. I suggest you get something to write with, if that will be helpful for you to keep track of them. If you prefer, you can simply pause the video and use your imagination. You don't have to write anything down. It's up to you. My goal is to lead you through some fun exercises that will help you flex your imagination muscles and give you some new tools to use when you are trying to develop characters or improve your acting skills. Today we're going to focus on the idea of setting or environment. The setting is where you place characters, and where events take place is critical in stories because it has such a big impact on the behavior and the feelings of the characters. A lot of human actions are motivated by the feelings that we have. For instance, if a character feels very happy, they might smile or hug somebody else. But if a character feels angry, they might stomp away. You can imagine that in the setting of a birthday party, a child who received a present might feel very excited and happy. But at the same birthday party, perhaps there is a brother or sister who feels jealous or angry about not getting attention, and they stomp away. In the example that I just gave, I am demonstrating that one setting or environment can lead to two characters having very different behaviors. Their actions and their feelings could easily inspire me to imagine what the two might say to each other. What do you think that might be? What about if they were talking to their mother? Pause the video and write down one or two things that you think those characters would say to each other. Here are my examples. The first child said, "Thank you for the Legos, Mom, I love them." The second child said, "Why does Michael always get whatever he wants and I never do?" Can you imagine the body language of those two children? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine what the first child looks like saying his comment, or whatever comment you thought up that he would say in that moment. And then as a contrast, imagine the body language or the movements of the second child. If you were acting one of those roles in a play, how would you show the feelings of those characters? What tone of voice could you use to express their feelings? Let's take this exercise a little further. Close your eyes, if it helps you, and imagine their mother. What does she look like? How old is she? What is she wearing? What is her response to the two children? Can you imagine what Michael says to the mother? And can you imagine what the mother says to Michael and also to the child who is feeling badly? Pause the video and make some choices about this scene. The scene that we have been imagining is a simple scene that could happen in any family, but it's a great example. A great scene for acting or for a story because it contains people who care about each other and who are experiencing a conflict that must be resolved. A story with a conflict that needs to get resolved is a great basis for drama. It catches the attention of the audience because we get curious about how other people will resolve their problems. If you want to, pause the video and take the time you need to write out or imagine a whole scene between these three characters. Using your imagination, decide how the conflict will develop. Imagine what all the members of the family say to each other. Imagine how they get the second child who is stomping away to come back to the room. At the end of your scene, does the second child feel any better? Now let's come up with a totally different setting for some characters. Our first setting was useful because we were thinking about a family with a conflict. But let's think about some other kind of problem that could come up from the setting itself. How about a dangerous setting or a scary place? What about walking on a narrow path, hiking high up into the mountains? Or maybe going into a haunted house or a witch's hut? Close your eyes and imagine that setting. Take a moment to choose whatever dangerous or scary setting you would like for your characters. Now close your eyes and imagine what that setting looks like. And imagine one character first. Imagine some details about that character. Think of, for instance, their age, their gender, perhaps what they're wearing. And think about it for a moment. What do they see all around themselves in that setting? And what do they want? Why are they there? Now, using your imagination, decide who else is in that setting. Maybe it's a friend who's there to help them on their mission. Or maybe it's an enemy. Or someone who's scary to that person, like a witch. Take a few moments to decide who it is and think about some details about that character. I'm going to ask you to imagine a lot more things in the next few moments, so please feel free to pause the video anytime you need to take your time to use your imagination. You can always rewind it a little bit if you need to. So we're going to use another tool from our imagination toolbox. This tool I would like to call movement. We're going to imagine that your character moves within that setting. They change their location from their original place to someplace else within that same setting. What kind of steps do they take in their movement? Are they bold steps? Are they a little bit nervous? Do they move slowly or do they move quickly? What do they see when they change their position? What new objects or other characters come into their line of sight? Once you have decided what your character notices by changing their location, think about how that makes them feel or what they think. And imagine some comment they might make to express their thoughts or feelings about that new thing. Whom are they speaking to? Is it to the friend? Is it to the other person, an enemy perhaps? And what does that second character say in response to the first person? If it makes sense in your setting with your characters, imagine that one or both of them now moves on to a third location in that same setting. Why did they move to the new location? Does that change the relationship between the characters? Does one of your characters want to say something else now because they are in that new location? If you could follow my questions and they help to stimulate your imagination, great. On the other hand, if you found yourself saying no or I don't know, that's okay. Everybody's different. For some people, they need a little bit more time. So take the time you need and let your imagination work. Just practice it. I'm sure it'll come along. I promise you that if you keep trying to have an open mind, you will make progress. One really helpful tool when trying to make up stories and trying to decide what your character might do next is the idea of yes and that comes from improvisation. The yes in the yes and means to have an open mind, to trust the creative process. And the and in yes and means that we are always seeking to add in some new detail of information. Because one piece of information can easily spark the idea for the next piece of information. And as you add detail after detail, you keep moving the story forward. Each new detail can inspire the next one, and eventually you will have a whole scene or story. You can always go back over it later and edit it. You can also make changes to make it even better by getting rid of parts of the story that don't really seem to help move the story forward. Or maybe that make the story confusing. You can also decide which additional characters you can add in or additional details to make the story even better. These details will help you act out your character if you are trying to use the storytelling process to inspire your imagination. And if you're not acting, if you just want to write a story, all the details will really help bring the story to life in the imaginations of your readers or your listeners. Let's review what we've been learning in our lesson today. Settings are important because they cause characters to feel and to think thoughts that might not happen in a different setting. We also learned that different kinds of problems can happen in different settings. For instance, there can be problems between people that commonly happen in settings like homes or perhaps a playground. We also learned that a conflict can arise from the setting itself. For instance, how are two friends going to get past a troll on a narrow path? Or how will they keep their balance and not fall down the mountain? Or if they're going into a haunted house and they see a ghost who talks to them and they feel frightened, what will they do about it? Another aspect of the setting that was so important was to imagine what your character sees. Imagine if they're in a snowy winter place. They will see trees covered with snow. Perhaps they'll see an igloo. Perhaps they'll see a polar bear. But on the contrast to that, perhaps you imagine your characters in a desert where there's no water. And so their struggle becomes finding a cactus and cutting it open to help save their lives. Every environment that you imagine will offer opportunities for you to create stories for the characters in relationship to whatever objects are in that environment. Try to add objects into the environments that cause the feelings of your characters to change. Perhaps it makes them excited, perhaps it makes them disappointed or frightened. Stories at their heart are really about feelings, so we want to add in whatever details we can to make the feelings strong in the characters. It makes the stories more interesting. And one of the final ways that we tried to think about setting was using the idea of movement, of changing location within a given setting. You can imagine, for instance, that your character is at the beginning of a forest, and they have certain feelings, perhaps of apprehension or excitement when they have the forest in front of them. But then once your character steps into the forest, what happens next? That would be the beginning of the middle part of your story. Their feelings could change when something else happens that they discover in the forest. Perhaps they notice an owl way up high. Perhaps they notice a rabbit. Perhaps a bear comes towards them. There's so many possibilities. When you change the location of your character, you can change what they see, what they think, and what they feel. This all helps to move the story forward. I hope you will practice using all the ideas that I have introduced to you today. Perhaps now you'd like to take some time and write your own scene without any of my ideas. Try to come up with some dialogue that happens between at least two characters in a setting of your own choice. As an alternative, you could also write the thoughts and feelings of one character. That's called a monologue. Remember though, the person is usually addressing some other person, so try to keep that in mind. Be sure to imagine whom a character is speaking to. That choice will help you come up with some of the details of what they say, because we usually shape what we are saying to be heard by a certain person listening to us. It always influences what we say, and usually in real life, we have a reason why we communicate with that person. In acting, we call this the motivation of the character. What motivates them to talk, to communicate? And which words do they choose to use to express their thoughts or feelings? This has a lot to do with the effect they want to have on the listener. That's all until next time. Take care, enjoy your imagination, and have fun this summer.